Now, this notion is highlighted in the parable of the talents. There's this parable where this king, he comes to his servants and he gives them each one a certain amount of talents. He gives, I forgot, 10 to 1, 5 to 1, and 1 to the other. There's a certain. So the first one, he takes the talents and he invests them in whatever the investment was, and he multiplied it by a certain amount, quite a bit actually. And so the king comes back and look, you gave me this many, and we got this many. He multiplied the talent. And the king was really happy, so he gave them, a lot more. And then he came to the other guy, and the other guy had multiplied them, not quite as much, but he had multiplied them too. And the king was happy, and he gave him some. And the last one, he took the talent and he buried it in the ground. And he said, well, I know that you're a harsh person, reaping where you don't sow. And so I was worried that that if something happened to this, you might, give me a hard time. So I buried it in the ground. And he basically called him a useless and slothful servant, or something to that effect, and took it and gave it to the ones who had invested it wisely. Now, the talent was a coin, a type of coin, a type of currency. But the parable is your talents, your abilities, your stewardship over all that God has given you, your talents, your abilities, your time, whatever it is that God has given you. As a matter of fact, originally when we were I was thinking about putting this presentation together, there was a 5-part series from the Acton Institute of Religion and Liberty called something on, it was a curriculum on effective stewardship. And one of the presentations in there is stewardship over our talents, our abilities. So, if people want to see it, go to acton.org, the Acton Institute for Religious Liberty, and go into their material, and it's a curriculum on stewardship. And it's got excellent material there. But this is talking about, in here you have, in case of the first two servants, they were willing to take a risk. They were willing to invest in something to try to make something happen. And this is very similar to the parable, to this paradoxical saying, he who seeks to gain his life shall lose it, and he who seeks to lose his life shall gain it. So obviously, he was talking about a lot more than just investing. He was, that life is about self-giving. And if you seek to hoard something, you lose your life. And he was also talking about sacrifice. And there's many different ways you can understand that. But if you apply that principle to your economic realm, if you're willing to take a risk and invest your time and your talents and your energies into an endeavor which may cause you to lose, the risk of loss, you're willing to accept the risk of loss, then great gain can come. And that's what I think, and this is not just this is in all aspects of life. But if you apply this principle to the realm of economics, you have entrepreneurship, you have economic prosperity. And this is, in addition to, you're channeling self-interest into something, that is the willingness to invest yourself into something. This requires a little bit more of a leap of faith than ordinary self-interest. And so it starts off as self-interest, but you have to almost have a leap of faith that if I invest this time and energy and resources and capital, that something good is going to have to come out of that. That is almost an act of faith. And that is at the heart of entrepreneurial free enterprise. And that's slowly, over a period of time, the Puritans had come to understand this. Adam Smith wrote his book in 1776, The Wealth of Nations, where these principles were articulated. But a long time before he wrote the book, they had come to realize this through their own experimentation. Now, the shining example of how this works, and I've mentioned this before, I'm going to mention it again, was in the colony of Pennsylvania at the time when the Quakers were the dominant religious group there. And I say they were in control of the economy of the colony, but it gives a misimpression because they didn't control anything. They were laissez-faire, they didn't believe in centralized control at all. And this is, again, I've talked about this before. There is an essay on the internet. It's called A Holy Experiment in Laissez-Faire. And this is about the Quaker approach in Pennsylvania. Now, when William Penn came to Pennsylvania, he had a charter. And the charter required that they have a certain amount of taxes because they have to, some of it, a certain percentage of it has got to go back to England. So they did levy some minimal taxes. Now, there was a very light duty on liquor. There was an export duty on furs, and it was a small sales tax, and that was it. But that doesn't tell the whole story. This was not something that they sat around and said, let's levy these taxes for revenue. They're doing the minimum to satisfy the requirements of their contract. In order, you have to have someone collect these taxes in order for them to make their way from the people to the government, which for a good period of time didn't exist. Because whatever representatives or legislature they had for long periods of time, they didn't even meet. And they didn't collect the taxes for most of the time. When the representative of the British government came to receive the taxes, he met with an empty office and no one there. And he's having a fit, and he's going to, he's fire and brimstone, yelling and all these things. He's going to call down, the plagues of God on them. But it's classic nonviolent civil disobedience. If you don't meet together and there's no decision making by a council, then nobody can act. So he went home eventually to England in a rage, and he didn't collect his taxes because there was no one to collect it for him. And so this was laissez-faire in the extreme, and as we mentioned before, laissez-faire is a French term, means leave us alone, which is associated with what we refer to as extreme libertarian limited government approach. And by 1700, you would wonder, well, how does this possibly work? How is the poor going to be taken care of? How are all these things we associate with civilization going to come about if we don't have someone controlling something and we don't have a centralized? Well, let's take a look and see how this worked. By 1700, Philadelphia means the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Less than 20 years in existence. They came into existence in 1680, so less than 20 years in existence. They had outstripped New York as a cultural center, and they were challenging Boston for the top spot, which had been there for a lot longer. And Philadelphia was the second colonial town to have a printing press. It was the third one to publish a newspaper. It had the best hospitals of any of the colonies, following the Quaker tradition of compassion. And because of the book collection of James Logan, who was a scientist and classical scholar, its library was second only to Cotton Mather's library in Boston. So it worked because of the moral and religious values that the people had. You either are going to hold a society together by morality and religious values, or you're going to hold a society together by legislation and force. The more you have of one, the less you need of the latter. And vice versa. If you don't have a moral society rooted in religious values, you're going to eventually have cohesion, because a society will not exist in a situation of chaos. So this is one of the dilemmas that you have within, for lack of a better term, the conservative movement. You have the limited government libertarian types who are focusing upon individual freedom and limited government, and then you have the social conservatives who are focusing on values. But you really can't have one without another. And you can't have economic liberty without strong family values and a strong family unit. And you really can't have a strong family unit without the freedom that gives rise to these kind of values.